I knew something was wrong with the building before my shift had even properly started because the lights in the east hallway were already off. And the east hallway lights were never supposed to be off. Not according to the printed checklist taped beside the security desk. Not according to the night supervisor who trained me 2 weeks earlier, and definitely not according to the laminated rule sheet that said in plain capital letters, "East hallway lights remain on at all times." But when I looked down the corridor, the bulbs were dark, and the hallway looked deeper than it should have, like the shadows had stretched while no one was watching. And for a long moment, I just stood there holding the clipboard, wondering if I should write it down or pretend I hadn't noticed it. Because the first rule about night shifts in empty places is that the less attention you give strange things, the easier it is to finish the night without your brain inventing problems for you. Before this gets worse, if you enjoy true horror stories like this, subscribe to the channel. I upload new, terrifying stories every day, and some of them are honestly worse than this one. But then the radio on the desk crackled once, even though nobody else was scheduled in the building, and a voice I didn't recognize said very quietly, "You saw the lights, didn't you?" And then the radio went dead again. I told myself it was interference, because old radios do that sometimes. Especially in buildings like this one that used to be something else before it became a storage facility for medical archives. Thousands of boxes of files stacked behind locked doors. The kind of place that technically doesn't need security but hires someone anyway. So the insurance company feels better about it, and that someone happened to be me from midnight until 8 in the morning 5 nights a week, walking the same quiet loops through the same echoing corridors where nothing ever happened, which is why the training video they showed me spent more time explaining the coffee machine than explaining the building itself. But there had been one strange part during the training when the supervisor paused the video and said something that at the time sounded like a joke. He said, if the east hallway lights ever go out, don't go fix them, just note the time and wait until they turn back on by themselves. And when I laughed, he didn't laugh back. He just said, "Trust me on that," which is exactly what I remembered as I stared down that dark hallway while the radio sat silent beside me. I wrote the time on the clipboard even though my hand felt strangely slow while doing it, like the act of acknowledging the darkness somehow made it more real. And after that, I decided to start my first patrol early because walking usually helps clear my head. The building had 3 floors, but only the first one was used regularly. The other 2 mostly contained sealed rooms and old file storage, so the patrol route was simple. Lobby, West Hall, stairwell, East Hall, back to lobby, every 30 minutes until sunrise, and normally the East hallway was the easiest part because the lights there were bright and humming, and the walls were painted a color that made everything feel clinical and ordinary. But tonight the hallway looked wrong, even from the entrance. Darker than just lights off, like the ceiling was higher or the floor longer than I remembered. And I stopped at the corner because something else had changed too. There was a piece of paper taped to the wall that hadn't been there earlier in the evening. The paper looked like it had been printed from the same kind of office printer we used downstairs. Plain white sheet, slightly crooked tape on the corners, and in the middle were 6 typed lines that said, "East hallway temporary rules. 1. Walk normally. 2. Do not run. 3. If you hear footsteps behind you, keep walking. 4. Do not look into room 17. 5. If the lights turn on again, do not celebrate. 6. if you see someone else in the hallway, they work here too. And that's when I realized something was seriously wrong. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you're subscribed, because the next one might be even worse. I stared at that paper for a long time because the wording didn't make sense in a place where I was supposed to be alone, and the tape looked old enough that it should have curled by now. But instead it held perfectly flat, like it had been placed there hours ago, maybe minutes. And I wondered if the supervisor had put it there earlier without mentioning it. Maybe part of some weird security test. But if it was a test, it was a strangely specific one, especially rule number 6. The east hallway smelled different when I stepped inside. Not bad exactly, just older, like dust that had been sitting in still air for years. And my footsteps echoed louder than usual, which made me walk slower, even though rule number 1 said walk normally. And I tried not to think about rule number 3, but after about 10 steps, I heard something that sounded exactly like another pair of footsteps behind me, slightly delayed, like someone copying my pace half a second later. And my first instinct was to turn around because that's what anyone would do. But the rule sheet flashed in my mind, and I kept walking instead, telling myself the echo in this hallway had always been strange, and I had just never noticed it before. The footsteps stopped when I stopped, which made me start walking again almost immediately, because standing still suddenly felt worse than moving. And halfway down the corridor, I passed the door labeled E17, the number printed in black marker on a small metal plate. And even though the hallway was dark, I could see a thin line of light underneath that door, which was impossible because none of these rooms were supposed to have power at night. But the rule about not looking inside had been very clear, so I kept my eyes forward while passing it, and for a moment the light under the door flickered brighter, like someone had just moved in front of it. By the time I reached the end of the hallway, the east lights suddenly flickered back on with a buzzing sound, so loud it made me flinch, and the corridor looked perfectly normal again, bright and empty, and much shorter than it had felt while walking through it. And when I turned around, there was no paper on the wall where the rules had been taped. I told myself the paper must have fallen and someone had picked it up earlier in the evening before my shift, but that explanation didn't make sense because there had been tape marks and now those were gone too, like the wall had never held anything at all, and I probably would have convinced myself the entire thing had been my imagination if the radio hadn't crackled again while I was standing there. This time, the voice sounded closer to the microphone, almost whispering, and it said, "You didn't run good." Then silence again. I checked every channel on the radio after that, but all I heard was static. So I finished the rest of my patrol quickly and returned to the desk where the security cameras showed all the usual angles of the building. Lobby, stairwell, west hallway, loading dock, and east hallway. And for a while, everything looked normal, except for one detail I hadn't noticed before. The east hallway camera had a timestamp that lagged exactly 30 seconds behind the others, which seemed like a technical glitch until the second patrol, when the camera feed showed something moving down that hallway half a minute before I actually walked through it myself. At first I thought it was just the delay, but the shape on the screen didn't move the same way I did. It walked slightly slower and paused briefly outside door E17, even though I hadn't paused there on my first patrol. And the strange part was that the camera showed the hallway lights on, even though I could see with my own eyes that the lights outside the desk lights were currently off again. The radio crackled a third time around 1:40 a.m., and the same voice said, "When the lights are off, the cameras show tomorrow." And I didn't respond, because I had no idea who was talking or why they sounded so calm about something that made no sense at all. My next patrol took longer because the moment I stepped into the east hallway, I noticed something new on the wall where the rule sheet had been before. Not paper this time, but faint rectangular marks, like something had been removed repeatedly over the years. Layers of tape outlines overlapping each other as if many different notes had been posted there at different times. And while I was looking at those marks, I heard the delayed footsteps again, matching my pace exactly except for that half-second gap. And suddenly the hallway didn't feel empty anymore, even though every door remained closed. Halfway down the corridor, the lights flickered once, and I heard the sound of a door handle gently turning behind one of the rooms, even though none of those rooms should have been unlocked at night. And that was when I noticed the number on the door ahead of me had changed from E14 to E18, even though I knew for a fact I hadn't passed E17 yet. I kept walking because stopping felt worse than continuing, and when I finally reached the door labeled E17, the thin line of light underneath it was brighter than before, bright enough that the floor in front of the door looked almost warm, and from inside the room, I heard something that sounded like quiet typing, steady and patient, like someone working late in an office that technically didn't exist anymore. I walked past without looking in, just like the rule had said, and the moment I passed the door, the typing stopped. The lights came back on again right after that, buzzing loudly, and when I turned around, the door number behind me now read E16. The rest of the night should have been normal after that, but it wasn't, because each patrol brought one small change that hadn't been there before. A new scuff mark on the floor that looked like a chair had been dragged across it. A faint humming sound from behind one of the sealed archive rooms. A shadow on the camera feed that moved before the lights turned off. And eventually another rule sheet taped to the east hallway wall around 3 a.m. with only one line printed on it. If you hear someone call your name, do not answer. I didn't hear anyone say my name that night, but I did hear the radio whisper it once while the hallway lights were off, and the voice sounded exactly like my own. By the time my shift ended, the east hallway lights were on again and the building looked ordinary. But when the morning supervisor arrived, he glanced at the clipboard where I had written the time the lights first went out, and he sighed quietly, like someone who had seen the same thing many times before, and he asked me only one question. He said, "Did you follow the rules?" And when I said yes, he nodded and told me that was good because some people didn't, and the people who didn't usually stopped appearing on the camera feed after a while, even though the east hallway camera kept running for another 30 seconds, showing someone still walking there long after they were gone. And when I asked him who had been speaking on the radio, he looked confused for a moment and said, the radios in that building didn't actually transmit outside the desk anymore because the wiring had been disconnected years ago. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real horror experiences like this, subscribe to the channel. I upload new terrifying stories every day, and trust me, some of them are even more disturbing than this one. I finished that shift feeling tired but mostly relieved, the way you feel after a strange dream fades in the morning light. And I probably would have convinced myself the entire night had been stress or imagination if one thing hadn't happened right before I left the building. Because when I stepped outside and checked the time on my phone, I noticed something strange. about the security camera app we used for emergencies. The east hallway feed was still open on the screen, still running 30 seconds ahead of the others. And in that future version of the hallway, the lights had just turned off again, while someone slowly walked past the camera toward door E17, and the person walking there looked exactly like me.